3 weeks ago, I stood in a wedding hall holding a champagne glass, waiting to tell my son how proud I was. 48 hours later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office signing away everything he thought he would inherit. And before you decide whether I'm the villain or the only sane person in this story, you need to hear exactly what happened. Because it took 4 words to end my son's world, and I only said them once. The pen felt heavier than anything I had ever held. Heavier than metal deserves to feel. Heavier than years of sacrifice should rest in a person's hand. It wasn't the physical weight of it. That part was trivial. It was the symbolic weight. The years, the drives, the sleepless shifts, the second and third attempts at forgiveness, the silence, the swallowed responses, the unspoken boundaries, the unreturned calls. Everything rested in that pen. The lawyer sat across from me, her posture straight, her perfume expensive, floral, polished, almost sterile to my world of coffee stains, hospital disinfectant, and garden soil. She watched me with eyes that did not pity me nor rush me. The eyes of someone who has seen families collapse across desks like this one. Papers lined the surface between us. Stacked, clipped, marked, notarized. The kind of papers that don't ask how you arrived at the decision they require. They only record that you did. October rain hit the window beside us. Fast then slow then fast again. Like even the weather understood that today was not the kind of day that moves casually. My phone vibrated against the wooden surface. The name lit across the screen without needing to be read. Dominic. Call 48. 48 separate attempts at control disguised as urgency. I did not face the screen. I did not need to. I already knew the tone he would take. Demanding, dismissive, possessed with the confidence of someone who has never once been forced to accept consequences for their actions. Mrs. Patterson, the lawyer finally said, her voice professional, softened only enough to keep me standing on balance. Are you absolutely certain? Absolute certainty is not born from anger. It is born quietly, slowly, steadily, when love becomes misuse and sacrifice becomes entitlement. My fingers fanned gently over the signature line. My name printed in black letters waited like a verdict. I could smell the leather of the chair beneath me, the air conditioning whispering above, the sterile aroma of fresh paper. Everything around me contradicted the memory of where I was 3 weeks ago. Music, lights, champagne, laughter, 100 people wearing coordinated smiles while my son asked me to leave. The pen pressed against the page. The sound it made was sharp and quiet at the same time, like fabric tearing behind closed doors. The ink spread into the fibers with every stroke. A woman signs her name differently when she knows the signature will change everything. We'll just move through them one at a time, the lawyer said gently, sliding the second document forward. I sighed inwardly, not from exhaustion but finality. My hand moved again, slower this time, not because I doubted anything, but because I wanted to remember this moment, the moment I stopped being someone who tolerated being discarded. I remembered waking up at 4 a.m. the day of the wedding, ironing that navy dress Bridget insisted on to fit her aesthetic. I remembered stopping for gas halfway through the 4-hour drive. I remembered checking my face in the mirror at a rest stop bathroom, telling myself not to cry, not to look tired. I remembered finding the perfect parking spot outside the venue because I arrived before everyone, hoping he would need something, hoping I could help. I remembered walking inside with that card in my purse, the $8,000 from overtime shifts that left my legs throbbing so badly some mornings I would have to sit on the bed before standing. I remembered the moment he walked toward me, smiling only for the people behind me, then turning his eyes cold enough to break glass. Mom, you need to leave. 4 words. Not whispered, not questioned, not hesitated. Not, could you step aside? Not, we need space for a moment. Well, just leave. Leave the room. Leave the moment. Leave the celebration. Leave the story. The same 4 words the lawyer's question now echoed beside. Are you certain? I was certain. Because certainty forms on the day you drive 4 hours alone with a sealed envelope full of sacrifice and return home with it unopened. I signed again. The lawyer initialed beneath it. Then stamped. Papers changed status from mine to legal truth. My stomach didn't twist. My chest didn't tighten. I didn't shake. I just felt a calm that belonged to women who have finally stopped trying to be chosen. Dominic used to cry when I left him on the first day of kindergarten, gripping the hem of my shirt, calling, "Mom, don't go." Now he sent me out of a room full of strangers like I was disrupting his air. People don't become entitled overnight. They become entitled when you make giving a habit and receiving an assumption. My phone buzzed again. Dominic, call 49. I imagined the expression cycling across his face. Annoyance first, then urgency, then disbelief, then anger. He would never speak of the wedding. He would pretend it was a minor disagreement. He would pretend that discarding me was temporary. He would pretend that asking for property afterward was normal. "You'll just need to sign these last few and we can finalize everything," the lawyer said. He nodded. My signature flowed into existence again. Long loops, deliberate curves, full name, no shrinking. Each stroke of ink wasn't closure. It was correction. It was reclaiming space in a life I had always occupied quietly. When I finished the final document, the lawyer organized them, clipped them, sealed them, and placed them into an envelope heavy enough to land like metal on the desk. "Is there anything else?" she asked. There was something unspoken that had been pressing against my throat since the phone first rang that morning. I reached for her office phone and dialed. His voice came through immediately. He must have been holding the phone. "Mom, finally. I've been calling you. We need to talk, Bridget's uncle is." "Stop," I said. Not loud, not emotional, just final. He stopped. Silence stretched like fabric pulled tight. "I'm only saying this once," I continued. "So listen carefully." That was when the lawyer lifted her head. Her eyes tracked my expression. Even she knew what it sounds like when a boundary becomes irreversible. Dominic breathed into the line, confused by the tone, trying to reassert control through conversation. "If this is about the wedding, I already said Bridget was anxious." "This is not about anxiety," I said. "This is about choices." Rain tapped against the window like distant applause. The clock ticked its way into permanence. The pen lay beside the signed documents like a witness. I wasn't the mother who drove 4 hours to give someone everything while receiving emptiness. I wasn't the woman walking out of a wedding with a gift still sealed. I wasn't someone being dismissed. Not anymore. He said something after that, something about deadlines, about opportunity, about how I was making this complicated, but none of it held substance. Because once a choice breaks something, nothing that comes after it has weight. "Dominic," I repeated, steady, measured, certain. "I'm going to say this once." I could feel the words rising, not from emotion but from clarity, not from anger but from closure, not to hurt, but to end a narrative that used me as its source. And those 4 words would change everything. But before you hear them, you need to understand the distance between the woman standing alone in a parking lot after being told to leave and the woman signing legal papers protecting legacy from access. That distance is the difference between being needed and being used, between being loved and being tolerated, between being mother and being resource. And that distance is where part 2 begins. Inside the wedding hall, beneath the chandeliers, when entitlement revealed itself in its purest form. I remember the exact moment the music stopped meaning anything. Before that moment, everything was moving. Glasses clinking, shoes sliding on polished floors, laughter rolling like warm air across the room, the DJ announcing something about dinner being served, waiters carrying trays like choreography. The ceremony had ended not 30 minutes earlier, and the reception had already swallowed everyone into its glow. The lights were soft, amber, fairy tale bright. My son looked like he belonged in a magazine. Fresh haircut, tailored suit, boutonniere pinned perfectly against his lapel. He looked proud, confident, settled, like everything in his life had just aligned perfectly. I stood there with a champagne flute melting water down my fingers, watching him speak to relatives from Bridget's side. People who barely knew him yet behaved like keepers of his new future. My feet hurt, but I didn't move. Because pain didn't matter that day. Presence mattered. I caught him looking my way once from across the room. A short glance, a quick half smile. Then he turned away again. I told myself not to read into it. Not to wonder why I wasn't seated near him. Not to wonder why Bridget's parents sat at his table while I stood near the dessert display. I was still smiling when he walked toward me, but the smile broke before he finished crossing the distance. He didn't touch my arm. He didn't greet me. He didn't say, "You look beautiful, Mom," or "Did you make it here okay?" He said, "You need to leave." That was it. No preface, no warmth, no hesitation. Just leave. The music continued. People danced inches away, unaware that the most life-altering moment was taking place next to the strawberry shortcake tower. The glass nearly slipped from my hand. I asked him what he meant, because surely he hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Surely there had been a misunderstanding. Surely he wasn't choosing volume over compassion. "You need to leave," he repeated, looking not at my face but somewhere past my shoulder, like someone else was directing him. "You're upsetting Bridget." Upsetting her how? Breathing. Existing. Wearing the dress she approved. Standing where others could see me. My voice cracked just enough to betray disbelief. "What did I do?" He didn't answer that question. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because answering would require admitting truth. And in a room full of witnesses, truth is easier to avoid. "Just go, Mom," he said. "Please don't make this difficult." Difficult. That word sat like a bruise. Difficult, from the boy who cried when I left him at kindergarten. Difficult, when I drove overnight to bring him medicine at his dorm when he was sick. Difficult, after paying for half the wedding flowers when they couldn't cover the difference. I could see the head table behind him. Bridget in her lace gown. Veil draped over her shoulder like royalty. Eyes cutting into me like she had written this script herself. Her smile wasn't cruelty, it was certainty. Certainty that influence had won. Certainty that possession had shifted. Certainty that my removal would not ruin her day. It would improve it. I asked him if he was sure. Not because I needed clarification, but because I knew that when regret eventually arrived, certainty would be the only proof. He said yes. Not softly. Not sadly. Not regretfully. Just yes. Like this was an errand he needed to finish. Like sending me away was no heavier than returning a store item. I set the champagne glass down so gently the server probably assumed nothing was happening. But everything was. 3 feet away, a DJ announced the bridal entrance. Everyone turned to watch. No one turned to see me leave. I didn't hug my son. I didn't touch his arm. I didn't say, "I love you." Love doesn't bargain for space. Love doesn't beg for permission. Love doesn't have to ask to be allowed in the room. I walked out of the hall without looking back. Because looking back is how heartbreak grows roots. Outside, heat hit me like a wave. June sun pooled across the parking lot, scattering shapes across car windshields, burning against asphalt that held nothing but distance. My car was still in the corner space where I parked at 10 a.m. I remember gripping my keys so tightly my knuckles whitened. Not because I was angry, but because steadying yourself sometimes requires something metal to anchor into your palm. I sat inside, air hot, breath shallow. I waited for shaking to stop. I waited for tears that never came. Numbness has a way of replacing emotion when the facts are too stark to process. Inside they were dancing, eating, toasting, taking photographs for albums I would never see. Celebrating love that was meant to expand families, not exile them. I drove home in silence. No radio, no music, no distraction. The road stretched endless, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel like someone's mother. I felt like someone removed from her own life. I got home near midnight, walked into a quiet house, set the envelope with $8,000 on the kitchen table and didn't cry. I didn't cry the next morning either, when the sun painted gold across my windows like nothing had happened. Nor when I pulled weeds from the front garden, because reality has a way of continuing even when hearts don't. Then the phone rang. Dominic. And I thought, maybe apology, maybe clarity, maybe the pain would reverse itself into reason. "Hey, Mom," he said with the tone of a man asking someone to confirm a delivery appointment. Can you send me the property papers? It wasn't a question. It was a directive. As if me being thrown out was simply a scheduling inconvenience he had forgotten. He didn't reference the wedding. Didn't mention his actions. Didn't acknowledge abandonment. He went straight into logistics. He spoke about subdividing like family legacy was inventory. He talked about development like grief had market value. He suggested I move into a more manageable living space because land that belonged to 3 generations of people before me was apparently too heavy for the woman who protected it alone. I didn't say no. I didn't say yes. I said nothing because silence reveals truth better than speeches. And truth was simple. When people think your value exists only in what you provide, they will continue requesting without repentance. He believed I would sign away history because he believed I was meant to serve his vision. He hadn't understood yet that love is not service. Love is stewardship. And stewardship does not sell what sacrifice built. I thought of my grandfather losing fingers to save enough to buy the land. I thought of my father building fences in winter wind until his knuckles cracked. I thought of Marcus making me promise with lungs collapsing, eyes fading, voice thinning into final truth. Keep the land in the family. None of those men envisioned it as currency. They built it to rest something permanent inside future generations. And here was my son, asking for documents 24 hours after telling me to exit his life quietly. That was when something shifted. Not anger, not retaliation, not revenge. Just clarity. Mothers do not stop loving. They stop giving access to places where love is mistaken for obligation. I stood up, walked inside, washed the dirt from my hands, and looked around the home that held every version of me. Walls painted by memories. Floors aging beneath footsteps of decades. Windows holding sunrise after sunrise I witnessed alone. That moment was not rage. It was awakening. Sacrifice can build an inheritance. But inheritance does not build character. And character was not present that day. That's why, when the lawyer slid those papers across the desk weeks later, I didn't hesitate. Because sometimes the only way to protect what was built before you is to keep it from those who believe it belongs to them simply because they exist. And that realization, standing beneath chandelier light with humiliation stuck to my skin like perfume, is where part 3 begins. I didn't sleep that night, not because insomnia came, but because clarity does not let you rest right after it arrives. Sits with you. Keeps the light on. It makes you evaluate everything. Quietly, without screaming. Sometimes you don't need dramatic emotion to change your life. You just need undeniable truth. I woke up before sunrise. The first thing I saw when I stepped outside was the barn. Its roof still weathered, the boards still faded, but still standing because someone built it with intention, not convenience. Intention lasts longer than affection. That barn was proof. I walked barefoot across the back porch, past the herb garden, down toward the lavender rows where bees were already working the quiet air. Welded into the earth beneath me was history, work, and sacrifice. And none of it came from anyone currently demanding ownership. The ground held footsteps from 3 men who had nothing but labor to create value. When people inherit something without building it, they treat it as entitlement rather than inheritance. I looked toward the oak trees, the ones my father planted when I was pregnant with Dominic. He planted 5 that year, 1 for each of his grandchildren and the 2 that never lived long enough to be named. He hammered stakes into frozen ground, tied ropes around them, checked them after rainstorms, talked to them like living archives of his hope. By the time Dominic could walk, those trees already had form. In photographs he stood beneath them, small, smiling, always beside legacy he did not understand. The day after the wedding, when he called asking for the documents, those same trees swayed in the wind outside my kitchen window like silent witnesses. I didn't answer his follow-up messages. I didn't reply when he texted, "Bridget's uncle needs these ASAP." I didn't reply when he wrote, "Mom, stop acting emotional. This is business." Emotional. Well, emotion would have apologized for the wedding. Emotion would have respected the person who raised him. This was entitlement, not emotion. And entitlement only recognizes two languages: permission and consequence. That morning, while boiling water for tea, I made a quiet decision. My love did not disappear, but my access did. For years, I had given access to someone who thought giving was automatic and receiving was optional. The day you learn that love without boundaries isn't kindness, it's surrender, is the day you stop surrendering. Later that evening, Dominic called again. This time he didn't open with logistics. This time he attempted softness. "Mom, hey. We should probably talk about yesterday." Calling the moment he expelled me from a wedding yesterday was audacity disguised as casualness. He attempted rational tone, tried to rewrite reality through semantics. "Bridget was overwhelmed," he said. "She felt judged." Judged by what? My breathing. My presence. The dress she approved. The silence I held while watching her family take priority at my own son's table. He continued, "Look, you know weddings are stressful. You know how emotional women can be that day." I almost laughed. Not from amusement but disbelief. Women are emotional. Interesting, considering the woman who stood in a parking lot alone didn't scream or cry or cause a scene. Emotional wasn't the problem. Accountability was. His voice shifted into urgency. "Anyway, we need the paperwork for the land. Uncle Ray wants to start the approval process today. This timeline is moving fast." Approval process. Timeline. Development projections. The language of someone who didn't realize what he was asking for wasn't permission. It was erasure. "It'll be huge for us," he said. "We could build 6, maybe 7 houses. Each unit could sell for." I stopped listening. Because somewhere between his capitalistic calculations and his inability to apologize, something in me detached. Love didn't end, but entitlement did. I interrupted him. "Dominic," I said, "what did you think was going to happen? You send your mother home early from your wedding and the next morning call for her deed papers. And that would just make sense to me." Silence. Not confusion. Just realization that consequence had finally replaced convenience. When silence comes from someone who is used to being accommodated, that silence is not thoughtfulness. It is shock that access is no longer immediate. "Mom," he finally said, "you know we're doing this for the future." Well, they were doing it for financial ease. They were doing it for projected profit. They were doing it for bragging rights. They were doing it for someone else's plan. Not my legacy. "Your future," I said, "is not my obligation." He didn't know how to respond. People who are raised through sacrifice believe sacrifice is renewable. They believe the person who gives will always give again. When giving stops, language collapses. His voice turned sharp. "Fine. If you don't want to help, at least send copies." Help. He had mistaken me for resource. He had mistaken inheritance as transaction. "Dominic," I said. "No, just that. No lengthy explanation. No emotional unpacking. No justification. Just no." He hung up. Not because he was angry. Because entitlement has no vocabulary when refused. I stood in the kitchen afterward with tea cooling beside me. The house was quiet. Unmoved. Nothing indicated loss, yet everything had shifted. That night, I walked the perimeter of the land. Tracing fence posts my father sanded by hand, touching tree bark my grandfather planted, listening to wind move across fields Marcus once mowed on summer evenings when Dominic would run barefoot across grass. I remembered being 31, pulling splinters from Dominic's palm after he tried to hold the edge of the barn door while it slid shut. He cried then, not because it hurt but because he thought he would not recover from it. Yet 20 years later, he didn't flinch when inflicting pain on me. That is the strange nature of parenting. Your tenderness becomes their assumption. Tears never came that night either. Because truth doesn't bring tears, it brings posture. And posture determines direction. The next morning at dawn I drove into town. I parked in front of the hardware store beneath the striped awning. I walked up the stairs into Patricia's office. She looked up when I entered. "Are you ready?" she asked. And I was. Not ready emotionally, ready ethically. Ready historically. Ready generationally. I want the land protected, I said. She nodded. She already knew. When someone has listened long enough, they begin preparing solutions before you request them. She opened a folder, thick, with legal designations carved into paper. A conservation trust, she said. Irrevocable. Permanent. Protected. Untouchable. Untouchable, that was the word I needed. Not because I wanted Dominic to suffer, but because legacy deserves insulation from entitlement. She explained the process. He listened. She explained the consequences. Accepted. She explained the permanence. I welcomed it. I did not hesitate. Not because I didn't love my son, but because I finally loved myself too. Once signed, she said, these cannot be reversed. Good, I said. Nothing that took 3 generations to build should be undone in one impulsive decision. Sign. Only. Deliberately. Completely awake. When the final page was stamped, embossed and sealed, Patricia gathered everything into a thick, weighted envelope. When she slid it across the table, I didn't feel vindication. Felt alignment. She asked if I wanted to call Dominic. I said yes. Not for validation, not to announce victory, not to wound, but to finalize the new shape of our reality. When he answered, he sounded relieved, assuming that silence meant surrender. Mom, finally. So did you get the documents? Uncle Ray can. Stop, I said. The word landed like a stone on marble. His breath froze. Silence again. Not discomfort, shock. Listen carefully, I said. Because I am saying this once. But that moment, those words, belong in part 4. Because part 3 was not the moment I told him the land was gone. Part 3 was the moment I decided my legacy mattered more than maintaining his comfort. And once a woman reaches that moment, nothing that follows is reversible. When a boundary becomes final, your voice changes first. Not louder, not harsher, just unshakable. That's how I sounded when I told him to stop talking. He froze. People like Dominic always freeze when certainty replaces negotiation. Listen carefully, I said, because I'm only saying this once. Patricia sat across from me, hands folded, watching my posture. Lawyers can always tell when someone isn't just speaking. They are severing. What is going on? He asked, the impatience already crawling back into his tone, like entitlement doesn't retreat easily. Did you get the paperwork or not? I did more than get them, I replied. And I didn't do what you wanted. I did what was right. Was. Not confusion. Fear disguised as confusion. What does that mean? He asked. Where are the documents? We need them. You're stalling the entire. It's done, I said. Finalized. Filed. Patricia lowered her eyes respectfully. Like witnessing truth being delivered deserved quiet. Dominic exhaled as if relieved. Good. Great. Have them couriered to. No, I said. One word. And silence expanded like a doorway closing. Mom, what does no mean? He asked. Not curious, threatened. It means you will never have access to the property documents, I answered. He laughed. Not amused but shocked. You're being dramatic again. Just send the copies and stop. I placed the land into a conservation trust, I said. Irrevocable. Legal. Permanent. What? That was all he managed. Not anger yet. Just disbelief that someone he believed would always bend had straightened. What do you mean placed into a trust? His voice shook. What are you talking about? That land is supposed to be untouchable now, I interrupted. Patricia nodded once. The weight of legal finality sat between us like cement drying. You didn't even ask me, he snapped. That land is mine too. Dad meant it for me. No, I said. Your father meant it to remain protected. I honored him. You tried to monetize him. Breath on his end turned heavy, uneven. You can't do that, he said. I'll contest it. I'll get a lawyer. You'll do nothing, I replied. And my voice landed so flat he stopped talking mid-threat. Silence again. This silence wasn't shock anymore. It was realization. And realization always sounds like breathing through a closing door. This property is no longer part of any inheritance, I continued. Not yours. Not anyone's. It now belongs to preservation. Cannot be subdivided. Cannot be sold. It cannot be leveraged. He whispered. That was supposed to be ours. It was never yours, I said. It was entrusted to me, and you proved you would not protect it. Patricia did not look at me like I was harsh. She looked at me like I was accurate. Dominic's voice rose, thin and frantic. I was planning my future. I counted on that land. You knew that. Yes, I said. And I lived my entire life planning for yours. And when you got the life I worked for, you removed me from it. His breathing grew louder. Can we at least talk about it? You did talk, I answered. The day you asked me to leave. He inhaled sharply. So you're punishing me? No, I said. I'm following through on the reality you created. You made a decision that day. I made one today. Mom. His voice softened. Not humility, desperation disguised as softness. It was a mistake. A mistake, I repeated. A mistake you did not apologize for. A mistake you continued when you called me the next day asking for documents instead of asking if I got home safely. Silence again. Longer this time. Waited. Patricia leaned back into her chair, not interfering because truth doesn't need support. Only space. Then he snapped. Because entitlement always snaps before surrender. I wasn't trying to hurt you. But you did. I was trying to protect my wife. And I protected my legacy. Are you seriously doing this over one argument? He shouted. 24 years of raising you, I said. And in the moment where respect was needed, you showed none. Yesterday I was disposable. Today you wanted profit. Those two events are not separate. They are connected. So that's it. That is the consequence, I answered. Not revenge. Not anger. Consequence. He swallowed audibly. You ruined everything. No, I said. I preserved everything. You tried to sell what belonged to men who bled for it. Then came the line that only the entitled speak when access is denied. Do you even love me? My chest didn't tighten. My voice didn't shake. Because love is not measured by access. Yes, I said. But my love does not entitle you to ownership. He whispered. I needed that land. And I needed respect, I said. We both learned what happens when we ask for what isn't given. He repeated softer. You can't undo it. Legal panic now, not emotional panic. Patricia spoke for the first time. It is irrevocable. No contestation is valid. No transfer is possible. The deed no longer exists under her ownership. A trust owns it. He exhaled, but this time his breath collapsed into itself. Who even benefits? Children you'll never meet, I replied. Students, preservation programs, land stewardship groups, anyone who appreciates land rather than converts it. Not me. Correct. Then came his final swing. You chose strangers over your own son. No, I said. I chose generations over convenience. I chose promise over pressure. I chose legacy over want. He hung up. I didn't call back. Patricia didn't ask if I wanted to. She simply said, let him feel silence. Nothing teaches entitlement faster. I walked out of her office into early afternoon air. The wind blew differently. Not softer, not stronger, just honest. I drove home, windows down. Sun moving across the mountains like light cleansing place where memory had collected. When I reached the property line, the land didn't feel threatened anymore. Felt secured, protected, documented, untouchable. That night I sat on the back steps. Moonlight cut through branches. Grass stirred. Everything was still. When someone finally understands that access to you was never a right, everything shifts. He called again at 9:21 p.m. I let it ring. He texted, we need to talk. I let it sit unread. Because talking is not owed. He sent a voicemail full of anger, accusations, pleas, and then silence at the end when words weren't working. I didn't listen. Not yet. Matey. I sat outside. Breathed. And something settled inside me, not victory, not satisfaction, equilibrium. For the first time in 24 years, I was not trying to soften reality for someone else. I was not anticipating someone's feelings. I was not compensating for someone's choices. I was simply existing with boundaries intact. This wasn't power. This was alignment. Love without boundaries becomes dependency. Giving without gratitude becomes depletion. Forgiveness without accountability becomes permission. And motherhood without self-respect becomes servitude. I refused all four. That refusal is where evolution begins. And that evolution is where part 5 lives. Because after silence comes consequence, and after consequence comes reflection, and the reflection did not happen in me first. It happened in him. Silence doesn't wound entitled people immediately. Confuses them first. When Dominic realized I wasn't responding, not to the texts, not to the voicemails, not even through Patricia, his tone shifted. Anger always comes before humility. His first message after hanging up was a storm. You ruined everything. You blindsided me. You had no right. I didn't reply. 3 hours later. Mom, answer the phone. We have to fix this. Fix meant reverse. Fix meant sacrifice again. Fix meant go back to being the safe place he discarded. I didn't reply. Midnight passed. A voicemail arrived. Long, sharp, biting, and still silence remained. Because silence isn't passive. Silence is the sound of someone finally choosing themselves. The next morning my phone buzzed again. Patricia texted. His attorney reached out. Don't worry. Nothing changes. I stood barefoot in the kitchen holding an unsteeped tea bag and whispered. Good. It wasn't celebration. It was alignment. For the first time, his urgency was not my responsibility. I went outside, pulled weeds, watered the herb garden, trimmed the lavender rose, and heard nothing but sunlight moving across land that no one could take now. Halfway through pruning the roses, a climbing variety my mother grafted before she died, my phone buzzed again. Not a call. A voicemail transcription popped across the screen. I glanced without opening it. Just enough to feel how predictable his words had become. Are you really going to ignore me? You're acting like a child. You know I need that land for my family. I laughed. Alone. Quietly. Because he didn't realize the irony. My family included me. Not just the woman who told him I was an inconvenience. I poured fertilizer into the soil. I wasn't angry. I wasn't grieving. I was simply aware. That afternoon I went into town to buy seed. The clerk asked how my son's wedding went. I told her. It was beautiful. Because beauty isn't negated by betrayal. Both can exist. And only people who have matured know that truth. When I got home, another voicemail waited. This one was shorter. Less anger. More instruction. Mom, it's not too late. You can call Patricia and undo it. Legal things are always reversible. Just fix it so we can move forward. Undone. Fixed. Reversible. It became clear that Dominic still believed he was negotiating, not losing access. I didn't listen to the full audio. I didn't open the text messages either. Days passed. The land didn't change. But something inside Dominic did. For people like him, silence isn't absence. Silence is exposure. When you stop responding, people hear their own words more clearly. On the 7th day of silence, a text arrived. Not urgent, not demanding, not manipulative. Just 5 short words. Are you angry with me? That was the first sign he had begun seeing the situation not as a transaction, but as consequence. He assumed anger because entitled minds think consequences always come from emotion. But I wasn't angry. I was resolved. And resolution doesn't need response. Later that evening, Patricia called instead of texting. She said. His attorney sent a follow-up email. He's arguing emotional distress. Smiled. He thought distress only existed when he was affected. Patricia exhaled through a laugh. Do you want me to reply? No, I said. Let the silence reply. Because silence becomes an education when someone has never been told no. That night I sat outside watching sunset pull orange into violet behind the barn. The boards creaked against cooling air. A hawk circled above the orchard. Everything about the land still belonged to us. My father's sweat in the fence posts, my grandfather's knuckles missing from the purchase, my husband's last breath attached to a promise. None of that belonged to profit. None of that belonged to contractors. None of that belonged to urgency. Dominic's calls slowed. His text shortened. His argument shrank. Because when your access to someone used to bending suddenly disappears, panic burns, then dissolves. On the 11th day he switched strategies. Instead of demands, appeal. Mom, can we at least talk? Not ask. Request. Respect was slowly forming. Not fully but visible. I didn't respond. Not yet. Not because I needed him to suffer, but because forgiveness without understanding becomes permission. And I was not permitting repetition. Saturday morning came. My doorbell rang. I froze, not because I feared him, but because I knew arrival meant bypassing silence. I didn't open the door. Waited. He rang again. Then knocked. Mom, I know you're there. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't entitled. It was small. Can we please talk? I stayed still. Silence doesn't just teach others. It teaches you. Teaches you that withholding access is not cruelty. It is clarity. After a minute he left. His car rolled down the driveway. Gravel crackled beneath the tires. He didn't look back. Later that afternoon Patricia called again. He wants mediation, she said. He says he wants closure. Closure is earned, I said. Not requested. Patricia asked no questions. She simply said, I'll inform his attorney there is nothing to mediate. When I hung up, I walked the length of the fence line. That fence existed because my father used to say, boundaries preserve everything that matters. When you grow up hearing boundaries explained as dignity, not division, you learn that closing access is not abandonment, it is stewardship. The following morning a letter arrived. Not an envelope filled with assumption. An envelope with weight. Letters carry remorse differently than texts. A letter requires stillness. Reflection. Time. I opened it at the kitchen counter. He admitted everything. Not because he understood yet, but because consequence had stripped entitlement. He wrote, I know you won't answer my calls. I know you're disappointed. I know I hurt you. That was the beginning of awareness. Not full but emerging. I thought it wasn't a big deal. I thought you would understand. I didn't think what I asked for was wrong. That was entitlement speaking honestly. He continued. Bridget told me she felt unwelcome and I believed her. I didn't think it was possible she was creating separation. I thought you were being controlling. He did not ask for property. He did not ask for reversal. He asked for understanding. Finally without expectation. But understanding cannot precede ownership of truth. And truth was not yet complete. He said, you taught me responsibility. You raised me to believe in legacy. I see that now. He ended the letter with, please reply when you are ready. When, not if. When means assumption still existed. When means he still expected eventual access. When means consequence had not yet been absorbed. I folded the letter. I placed it in a drawer. Not to ignore it, but to let reality continue sculpting accountability without interruption. Silence teaches better than speeches. Because silence forces someone to hear themselves. Later that day, I sat beneath the oak trees. The wind moved through branches like memory brushing skin. I traced my hand across the bark of the middle tree, the one planted the month he was born, and whispered, he will learn. Not because I needed him to change, but because consequences change people when explanations never could. And that moment marks something important. The shift from reaction to evolution. But evolution isn't instant. Takes more silence. Takes reflection. And eventually it takes surrender. That surrender is where part 6 begins. Silence didn't break him immediately. People who have been insulated from consequence don't change in a moment. They unravel slowly. It took 11 days for anger to fade into confusion, and it took 16 days for his certainty to crack into something that resembled humility. The letter he sent sat folded in the drawer beside the stove, beneath a stack of seed packets. I didn't reread it. Reflection doesn't require repetition. It requires distance. That Sunday morning I woke early and brewed tea. Not the cheap kind I used to drink after long shifts, but chamomile steeped long enough to remind me of nights when Marcus would sit awake beside me whispering plans for the land. Barn expansion, irrigation, new fencing, cattle maybe someday. He saw potential where others only saw soil. I stepped outside with the mug in hand. The sun hadn't risen fully yet. The air was pale gray, the meadow still damp from dew. Crows clustered near the fence line, pecking at the ground like they knew something had shifted. Sometimes nature reacts sooner than people. I sat on the porch. That was when the car turned into the driveway. Not too fast, not hesitant, just uncertain. It was Dominic. He didn't get out immediately. He sat with both hands on the steering wheel. I didn't move. He finally stepped out. He looked smaller, not physically but in posture. The kind of smallness that comes when certainty collapses. He walked toward me without confidence, without entitlement, without expectation. He didn't say, "Hey Mom," the casual tone he'd used before. He didn't ask for documents. He didn't bring folders, envelopes, laptops, or demands. He carried only hands that didn't quite know where to settle. "Can we talk?" he asked. Not assertive, not commanding, asking like a person aware that access no longer came automatically. I nodded once. Not permission, just acknowledgement that presence did not equal reconciliation. He sat on the porch step below me, not beside me. Below. It wasn't intentional humility, but positioning often reveals unspoken truth. He stared at the ground. I don't really know where to start. Silence made him uncomfortable, so he filled it. I didn't think leaving the wedding would hurt you the way it did. I didn't respond. Because truth doesn't deserve commentary. It stands unassisted. He glanced up at me. I just wanted her to calm down. She kept saying you were judging her, and I wanted her to be happy. The wind moved through the leaves above us. A blue jay landed on the railing. Nature doesn't pause for apologies. That's why they matter. They happen without audience. I didn't think you'd actually leave, he added. What did you think I would do? Yes. Not angry. Not sarcastic. Just direct. He swallowed. I don't know, stay maybe. Wait until she settled. So you wanted me to stay invisible until her feelings passed? Silence again. Then, I didn't see it that way at the time. He looked at his hands. I just wanted peace. Peace without fairness isn't peace, I said. It's compliance. He blinked hard, like someone seeing themselves clearly for the first time. I know that now. He said it softly, not performing regret. I've been thinking about everything, he said. I realized I acted like your love was guaranteed. There it was, the first admission, not about the property, not about the wedding, but about entitlement itself. You acted like I owed you something, I replied. He nodded. I did. He didn't justify it. He didn't soften it. He didn't say, but you raised me, or but family is supposed to. He just let the truth sit. Birds fluttered toward the line of cottonwoods near the creek. His voice thinned when he asked, Did you really sign everything? Yes. He nodded slowly, like absorbing legal finality physically hurt. So it's gone. For good. It's protected, I corrected. Not gone. Protected. He swallowed again. Protected from me. No, I said. Protected from misuse. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I realized this wasn't a conversation. It was change happening inside him without my assistance. "When I told you to leave," he finally whispered, "I thought you'd forgive me like you always do." That sentence fractured something, but not in me. In him. Because that was his first recognition of pattern. "You expected forgiveness without accountability," I replied. "That's not love. That's dependency." He nodded. "I know." Not argued. Accepted. "You don't owe me access," he said. Those were not words he had heard from me. That was something reflection taught him. Growth is not when someone apologizes. It is when they name what they used to assume. "I shouldn't have asked for the land," he said. "I shouldn't have expected it. I didn't even think about what it meant to you." His voice cracked, not because he sought sympathy, but because truth is heavy when owned honestly. "That land isn't just land," he continued quietly. "It's Dad, and Grandpa, and you." "Correct. I'm sorry," he whispered. Not dramatic, not rushed, not defensive, not padded with justification. Just sorry. He wiped his face with the inside of his jacket sleeve, embarrassed by his own emotion. "I'm not here expecting you to undo anything," he said. "I know you won't. You shouldn't. I get it now." That was the first time anything he said matched accountability. Not asking, not bargaining, not positioning, accepting. "I don't know what happens next," he continued. "I don't know if we'll talk again. I don't know if I'll be part of your life anymore. But I want you to know that I finally understand." The sun moved higher. The air warmed. The property held itself unchanged while he changed in front of it. "When Bridget left," he said softly, "I thought I lost a marriage. Then I realized I lost a mother long before that." He paused. "Because I stopped deserving access to her." That was the moment his eyes lifted toward mine. Not as a son demanding space, but as a man recognizing reality. "You deserved better than the way I treated you," he said. And then he stood, not waiting for forgiveness, not waiting for affirmation, not asking to stay, and walked back toward his car. He didn't ask if I would call him. He didn't ask when we would talk next. He didn't ask if things were fixed. He simply said, "Thank you for listening." Then he left. Gravel crunched beneath tires. Dust rose behind his car. And I sat there, not relieved, not broken, balanced. When he turned onto the road, the meadow lit with late morning sun. I stood and walked toward the oak trees. I put my hand against the bark of the one planted the month he was born. And this time I didn't whisper for him to learn. I whispered, "He's learning." Not fully, not finally, but truth was taking root. And growth never arrives instantly. It arrives slightly, painfully, honestly. That shift, subtle yet irreversible, is where part 7 begins. Growth rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive with flowers or apologies framed in poetic sentences. It arrives quietly, like a tap on a window, asking to be acknowledged without celebration. That is how the next weeks unfolded. Dominic stopped calling. Not abruptly. Gradually. Calls turned to texts. Texts turned to pauses. Pauses turned into nothing. But silence felt different now. Before, it was entitlement sulking. Now, it was reflection working. He needed space from speaking because speaking had always been his weapon. Silence became his mirror. And while he was figuring out who he was without control, I was figuring out who I was without being controlled. I didn't wait by the phone. I didn't check messages compulsively. I didn't rehearse responses. I simply lived. I woke at dawn, brewed tea, harvested herbs, pulled weeds from the side garden where the rosemary bush now grew wide enough to brush the kitchen windows. Every morning I walked the boundary lines, not because I needed reassurance, because I enjoyed remembering that protection requires maintenance, not apology. Spring settled into everything. Butterflies landed on the fence posts. Birds nested in the rafters of the barn. The meadow filled with green so deep it looked almost painted. The land didn't change because of paperwork. The paperwork preserved it so it wouldn't change. That mattered more than I could express. About 5 weeks after he came to the porch, a letter arrived. Not typed, not emailed, handwritten like confession deserves ink. I stood in my kitchen, wooden floor warm under my feet, and opened it slowly. His handwriting looked steadier, not rushed, not pressured. He had taken time. That matters. People apologize fast when they want something. People apologize slow when they mean something. He wrote, "I've gone through every version of anger I have left and none of it feels truthful anymore. Then, I blamed you because blaming you was easier than looking at myself." Not a line written to earn access. A line written to record truth. Then he wrote something he'd never said. "I didn't protect you when I should have. You protected me my entire life. And the moment someone else said you were a problem, I abandoned you to impress her." Reading those words was not emotional, it was clarifying. Because clarity is not an apology. It is a revelation. He went further. "I thought the land was my future, but now I understand. It wasn't my inheritance. It was your labor. Dad's promise. Grandpa's sacrifice. I treated your life's work like furniture I could relocate." Then, ink smudged a little near the bottom. "I don't want you to reverse anything. I just want you to know I see myself clearly now." And then he wrote something that belonged to no performance. "I grew up assuming you would always choose me. I never considered whether I was someone worth choosing." I folded the letter and placed it inside the cupboard. Not to hide it, not to archive it, but because important things don't need to stay in view to be remembered. Days passed. The land continued its routine. Grass needed cutting. The fence gate sagged near the hinge and needed reinforcement. The irrigation valve stuck twice, and I fixed it myself, kneeling on damp soil. Birds came and left. The world wasn't waiting for reconciliation. It was working. One evening, I drove into town to buy garden stakes. The cashier recognized me from the wedding, a distant cousin on Bridget's side. She said, "Haven't seen Dominic online much lately." And something about that sentence made the truth clear. People change when they experience consequence without rescue. Not because they decide to change. Because reality gives them no alternative. That night, I sat outside with the porch light off. The moon lit everything silver. The barn looked like a shadowed monument. Trees swayed as if memory moved through them. And I realized something crucial. Silence had become a boundary, not a punishment. And boundaries, when held long enough, become identity. Around the 9th week of silence, a second letter arrived. Smaller envelope. Shorter letter. No explanations. Just the core. "I know we're not talking. I know you're healing. I know I hurt you. I understand why silence is necessary. Just know that I am still learning." Healing is recognizing that apologies don't cure wounds. They acknowledge them. I didn't reply. Not because he didn't deserve acknowledgement, but because the version of him speaking now deserved a mother who was whole, not reactive. Silence continued. Then the attorney emailed Patricia. Nothing threatening this time. No demands. Just a simple note. Dominic Patterson withdraws all previously intended disputes. Withdraws. Not fights. Not questions. Withdraws. Patricia said. That concludes legal relevance. And then something rare happened. Permissionlessness appeared. When silence has lasted long enough, when consequence has settled, when accountability is no longer rehearsed, humility becomes authentic. Not because someone is sorry, but because someone has seen themselves through the discomfort of truth. One Saturday morning, a delivery truck drove up. Not flowers. Not expensive gifts. Not apology wrapped in extravagance. A wooden box. No signature. Just a tag that read, "For preservation." Inside. Seedlings. Oak saplings. 5 of them. Roots wrapped in mesh. Instructions folded beside them. No letter. Just seedlings. The symbolism was immediate. 5 oak saplings. My father planted 5. 5 grandchildren and unborn futures. Now Dominic sent 5. Not to replace anything. To reflect that he understood legacy was planted, not transferred. I planted them alone. kneeling in damp soil, pressing roots into ground, covering them with the same earth 3 generations of hands had worked into shape. And I whispered, not for him, not for my father, not for Marcus, but for the version of myself that no longer negotiates worth. This grows because of me. Not because someone gave permission, not because someone claimed ownership, but because I preserved, not reacted. 2 weeks passed. I was sitting on the porch when the wind shifted, cooler, bringing late spring rain smell. A truck turned into the driveway. Not Dominic's. The program director from the youth environmental group stepped out. She said, "The kids want to come again. Can we bring 30 instead of 20? "Yes," I said. "Bring them." Because land that was nearly reduced to profit now belonged to learning. And learning makes legacy permanent. 30 children arrived the next Saturday. They ran through fields Dominic would have bulldozed. They climbed fences Dominic would have sold. They walked inside a barn Dominic would have torn down. And one girl touched the new saplings and asked, "Who planted these?" I told her. Someone who finally understood what matters. She smiled without needing detail. And that was enough. That afternoon, as they loaded into their vans, 2 boys handed me drawings. Trees, barns, a field of yellow flowers. I pinned both drawings to the bulletin board above my kitchen sink. Dominic didn't know yet, not fully, but those children honored land he once intended to convert. And honoring does not require relation. It requires understanding. 3 days later, another letter arrived. Not long, 4 sentences. "I heard you planted the saplings. Thank you. I don't know when we'll talk again, but I'll wait. And when we do talk, I want to be someone who deserves that conversation." This time I put the letter in a drawer. Not to hide it, but to protect it. Because some truths don't need expression, they need time. That time is where part 8 begins. Time does not heal what you do not acknowledge. Time merely waits for you to become honest. And while silence continued between us, the land continued its life exactly as intended. Early summer arrived, and with it came heat that pressed itself into the soil, thick and unmoving. The saplings Dominic sent began rooting, their leaves widening, their stems thickening against winds that no longer frightened them. Roots grow fastest when unseen. That is true about soil, and it is true about people. I woke each morning and walked the fields barefoot. There is something about feeling land beneath your feet that reminds you nothing truly belongs to you. You are just its caretaker for the years you're alive. I carried a mug of tea and checked fence lines, tightened wire, hammered one loose post back into place. I wasn't holding on to land defensively anymore. I was protecting it purposefully. That difference matters more than anyone realizes. One Wednesday morning, I received an email from Patricia. Everything has been formally recorded by the state. The land is officially non-transferable and permanently preserved. No legal threats, no appeals, no counter-filings. Silence. And silence after determination is victory without celebration. I forwarded the email to no one. I didn't screenshot it. I didn't frame it. I just sat with it. Then I walked outside and told the land, "You're safe now." As if trees understand human declarations, though maybe they do. That evening it rained. Not loud, not angry. Gentle rain, slow rain, the kind that cleans more than it disturbs. I stood outside and watched droplets land on the 5 new saplings. Rain makes everything shine. And when something shines enough, you can finally see what you protected instead of what you lost. 2 weeks went by with nothing from Dominic. Not a call, not a text, not a letter. The kind of silence that used to hurt now rested like clarity. When people stop demanding access and start respecting distance, their absence becomes peace rather than punishment. Then, on a Monday morning, an envelope arrived. Not written by him, but by a legal office. My stomach did not tighten, those days were over. I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a single page. Not a threat, not a petition, just a record. His lawyer had officially withdrawn all inquiries into property rights. No further action will be pursued. Patricia called 5 minutes later. "It's over. Truly over." "Good," I said. And meant it fully. Not because I won, but because the fight had ended without me participating. I hung up, finished making oatmeal, ate it quietly while sun filtered through the blinds, turning the table golden. Normal life resumed. That is what peace is. Normalcy returning. Later that week, I invited the youth group again. This time, 35 children stepped into a world none of them owned, but every one of them honored. They touched barn wood, traced initials carved into beams from the year my father completed construction. 2 boys climbed inside the hayloft and pretended they were mountain goats. One little girl sat in the meadow drawing the oak trees with crayons that melted at the tips because of the heat. And while watching them, I realized something important. Legacies don't need heirs to survive. They need witnesses. They need caretakers. They need respect. A week later, I was at the feed store buying chicken wire when I heard someone say, "Mrs. Patterson?" Turn. It was an older man. Broad shoulders, faded work shirt, boots that had seen seasons. He introduced himself. "I'm Ray," he said. "Bridget's uncle. The contractor. The developer. The one who wanted 6 houses and profit margins." He shifted awkwardly. I heard what you did." I didn't respond. He continued. "I know we didn't meet, but I want to say something clearly. You were right." Those 3 words, coming from a man who measured everything in cost, surprised me. "When I first heard about the land," he said, "it was numbers, acreage, zoning, lot lines. But developers don't think about history. We think about potential. And profit," I added, "because truth does not soften to comfort others." He nodded. "Yes, profit. But when things fell apart, when Bridget left and everything became public, I realized that land wasn't opportunity. It was heritage. I misread what it represented." He wasn't apologizing for trying. He was acknowledging that purpose outweighed usefulness. "Your son," he said carefully. "He's hurting in ways he hasn't articulated yet. That's his growth," I replied. "Not my assignment." He nodded slowly, then thanked me and walked away. Proof that consequences reach beyond the person who caused them. They ripple. They teach indirectly. That night I sat on the porch again with tea and watched dust float like ash through the air. The saplings were growing visibly taller. Their leaves flickered under moonlight. Months ago, Dominic wanted to bulldoze that soil. Tonight that soil held new life. Later I checked the mailbox and found another letter. This one was not long. Not emotional. Just factual. "Mom, I enrolled in therapy. I'm learning how to separate my opinions from someone else's expectations. I'm learning what entitlement looks like when it collapses." He wrote one more line. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for readiness. Whenever you decide." Readiness, not access, not reversal. Readiness means waiting without assumption. Readiness means humility. I placed the letter with the others. Not in the drawer this time, but in the wooden box Marcus built the first winter after we married. A box meant for things worth remembering, not things worth debating. The next morning, I walked to the meadow with pruning shears and cut wild yarrow to place in a vase. And I understood something that mothers rarely admit. Letting your child learn without you is not abandonment. It is respect. For them. For yourself. For the story. A week later something happened. Not emotional, not dramatic, but symbolic. Delivery truck arrived. A package with Dominic's handwriting. Nothing expensive. Nothing extravagant. Not jewelry. Not flowers. Not gifts meant to impress. Inside was a book. Hard cover, worn edges, clearly used. A note tucked inside. "I found this in a second-hand bookstore. Dad's handwriting is inside the cover." My hands shook for the first time in months. The inscription read, "Land is not where you live. It is what you keep alive." Dated 1998. Marcus bought the book before Dominic even understood language. Dominic returned what belonged to legacy, not to inheritance. That mattered. Not because it made things right, but because it showed he understood what had been wrong. I placed the book on the mantel near Marcus's photo. That night I wrote. Not to send, not to deliver, just to express. Healing is not restoring what was lost. It is knowing you survived without it. The land was safe. My voice was intact. And Dominic, finally, was learning without demanding access to what he. Reconciliation doesn't always arrive with apologies or requests or invitations into the past. Sometimes it shows up quietly, almost without weight, like the moment you realize a wound no longer throbs when touched. That was how the next stretch of life unfolded. Days passed without bitterness, and silence slowly lost its shape and became simple absence, not abandonment. It began with a letter, written plainly, without a single plea hidden between the lines. Dominic wrote, "I don't expect communication. I just want you to know I have moved and I am building something small. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. I want to stand on my own feet this time." He enclosed an address but didn't ask for a response. It wasn't bait. It wasn't manipulation. It was simply information respectfully delivered. And that was new. Respect was always where reconciliation needed to begin. Spring approached the land early that year. Snow dissolved into damp earth, and the meadow returned to green. New buds formed at the edges of the saplings I planted, branches pushing forward like arms raised toward light. Their roots had settled. Their trunks thickened. They had survived what tried to kill them: the frost, the storm, the winter's burden. I found myself walking there more often than before, not to remember pain, not to mark loss, but to witness something growing where something fractured. One morning I was sitting in the grass beneath the old oak tree when I realized something subtle and profound. I had stopped replaying the wedding scene. I had stopped seeing myself standing with a glass of champagne, being dismissed like a guest who didn't belong. Even memory eventually quiets if you stop feeding it. Weeks later another envelope arrived. Not dramatic. Small handwriting. "Mom, I have been going to counseling. I didn't go because of the land. I went because I realized something about myself. I only understand love when it serves me. I never understood love when it asked something of me. You never needed things from me, only respect. I did not give it." He didn't ask to come home. He didn't ask to visit. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He acknowledged responsibility without expecting reward. And that was when the first real doorway cracked open, not into restoration of what existed before, but into something entirely different. May entered warm. Birds returned to the ridge. The property woke like something old learning to breathe again. I started hosting small educational groups, students, teachers, hikers, people who wanted to understand conservation, legacy, and protection. A brochure was printed featuring photographs of the barn, the willow tree, and the meadow. One journalist asked, "Why preserve something instead of profit from it?" I said, "Because value does not require transaction. Some things deserve permanence simply because people before us fought to keep them intact." The article printed 2 weeks later. I clipped it and put it inside Marcus's handwriting from years ago. That day, I opened his old notebook, and there was a line written in faded ink. "If we don't protect what came before us, everything we build afterward is hollow." He wrote that while Dominic was asleep at age 6. I never understood its fullness until now. One afternoon I went to town to buy fencing wire. At the checkout counter, Dominic stood a few feet away, holding a bag of groceries. His shoulders were less squared, his voice quieter. He saw me. He didn't rush. He didn't approach with expectation. He just nodded once. "Hi, Mom." He said it as if uncertain whether he still had permission to use the word. I said, "Hello." He smiled. Not the smile that wants something. Not the confident smile he used to flash when expecting agreement. Small smile. Human one. He didn't ask about the land. He didn't bring up documents. He didn't mention any future plan connected to me. He just asked, "How's your back been? Does it still ache in the mornings?" It startled me because it wasn't transactional. He remembered something that benefited nobody but me. We stood there for no more than 4 minutes. No deep conversation. No emotional tugging. just acknowledgement. Before leaving, he said, "When you're ready, not today, maybe not this year, but someday I would like to walk the property with you. Just walk, not talk about anything heavy. Just walk with you and see what I didn't value before." I didn't answer. Not because I rejected it, but because answers sometimes need to mature. I simply said, "Goodbye, Dominic." No bitterness, no scars exposed. Just a boundary spoken with clarity. Summer arrived again, warm and breathing. The trees filled with green. Volunteers helped reinforce the barn siding. The meadow bloomed into yellows, purples, and white clusters of wild yarrow. A photography club came one Saturday and asked if they could capture aerial shots of the land. I allowed it. The aerial photos made everything clearer. Boundaries visible, tree lines stretching, land unbroken by construction. People shared them online with captions about preservation and generational promise. That property belonged to no single person anymore. Not even to me. It belonged to stewardship. One evening I returned from the barn and found something on the porch. A folded note under a stone. I recognized his handwriting immediately. "Mom, I planted 3 saplings behind my house. Not because I expect them to grow tall while I'm alive, but because I finally understand that planting something is an act of faith. Not for self, but for whoever comes later." He didn't ask for a reply. He didn't ask if he could visit. He simply shared that he learned a lesson without requiring a reward for learning it. It wasn't reconciliation. It was realignment. It was not repairing old ground. It was planting something new. That night I walked outside, stood under the willow tree and whispered, "Thank you, Marcus," because the promise I made him had been honored. Not just legally, but ethically. The land was safe. The legacy was untouched. And the son we raised finally understood the difference between inheritance and responsibility. By autumn, we had occasional contact. Not emotional, not dependent. Just human. He called once to tell me he got a promotion. He didn't ask me to celebrate. He simply shared. He called another time to tell me he was bringing soup to a neighbor recovering from surgery. He didn't say it to look good. He said it because it mattered. That was when I realized forgiveness had begun. Not the kind that erases what happened, not the kind that negates pain, but the kind that no longer ties identity to injury. We didn't go backward. We went forward into something new. And maybe one day we will walk the property together. Not because he deserves access, but because he has become someone who no longer sees value as something you extract, but something you protect. The truth is simple. Real reconciliation is not when someone apologizes. It's when they change. Real healing is not when someone returns. It's when you no longer need them to. And real legacy is not what someone takes from you. It's what remains untouched long after both of you are gone. If someone watching this has ever been treated like they existed simply to provide, understand this clearly. You do not owe anyone access to what you protected. You do not owe anyone restoration just because they regret how they handled you. Your peace is not compensation they get to redeem. It exists independently. Now comment one word, healed. If you're not healed yet, put future, because both are valid. And then tell me, what part of this journey echoed yours? I read every comment. Each story matters. And the next video waiting on your screen right now might be exactly what your heart needs next.